Hey everyone, as promised, a debrief after that interesting and heartfelt conversation with my cousin Jan about becoming independent from things that are controlling you. I'm joined by a dear friend of mine, Dr. Rashad Saafir, who is a psychologist who consults with community mental health centers. He's really an expert in Black mental health, but as I've said many times, Blackness tends to be a little universal. So that's Dr. Saafir right there, and thanks for joining me.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's good to be with you again.
So you have many, many decades of experience with community mental health and a special focus on the behavioral health and mental health of African Americans. Um, is there something that we should know that's different from other people, or is it all just human?
Well, I think that for the African American community, we need to pay special attention to issues related to trauma, and particularly to the transgenerational
Mm.
communication of trauma and how that occurs within our families and within the community at large. We need to recognize the fact that as a people, we have a legacy of having been enslaved for over 400 years, and that a lot of intentional conditioning went on during that time to keep us in the mindset of being an oppressed people. And even though the chains of slavery were taken off, the chains that were installed in the mind still remain. And so I think that, being aware of that and understanding that a lot of the conditions that we experience in the Black community are not just related to our current circumstance, but that it goes all the way back to, when we were brought to this country against our will, in slave ships, in chains, and all that ensued after that. And so no other group in this country has that legacy to deal with. Some of us, fortunately, have dealt with it quite well. We've sought out therapy. We have educated ourselves, by accessing the wisdom of, individuals who have written about this topic, who've talked about it on social media. And so through that kind of awareness, there's an empowerment
Mm.
that we experience as Black people that can go a long way toward, reducing violence, um, um, ending this scourge of addiction that's plaguing our community, and that is particularly decimating the lives of Black males.
You talk about the scourge of addiction. And I 100% agree with you about the
Mhm.
generational trauma and brainwashing that they tried to get Black people to buy into over a series of 14, 15, 16 generations. And when you say no other group in America has been through, I don't think any other group in the history of civilization has been through what we've been through.
I
So
would agree.
the scourge of addiction. On the flip side, there seems to be this. Well, maybe we'll talk about that at the end. I like to end hopeful, but I think about how resilient
Mhm.
we are, right? And they say,
Yes.
we've been forged in the fire. So having come through that, whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger, kind of thing. Those of us who are strong are very strong, but we see people checking out or self-medicating. Which I, trying to be somewhere else. My cousin talked to me about liking the power of just kind of being out of what she really was experiencing, right? So
Mhm.
when she drank or took Red Devils, it was like I now have a different kind of power. I can act a certain way. I'm not afraid. Um, is there a difference in the addictive behavior of Black people than other people?
I think that the addictive behavior of Black people um, is motivated by the circumstance that we find ourselves in. So I don't want the audience to go away thinking that there's something innate about us that,
Yeah.
again, we're inferior because we're so susceptible to addiction. No, like your cousin, you know, what motivated her to even try drugs to begin with was probably born out of a sense of pain and not belonging and being different and just wanting to change her reality. You
Right.
we put a lot into trying to get people to modify, their self-perception and their thought process, particularly, through psychotherapy, but we don't do a whole lot in terms of addressing the issues of culture and environment that contribute to why people end up, resorting to drugs as a way of, like you said, self medicating. And what are we self medicating for? We're
Right.
self medicating for pain. And the quickest way to end pain is to take a painkiller.
Mm. But it's not very sustainable. My brother
No,
could be argued had a great life, loving family, etc. But I don't know what it was like to be in his shoes, to walk through a white world as a black man and be considered, inferior by many that you run into, or to be feared. So, as we used to always say, why in the world would he turn to that? But the why is one thing. How do we turn away from it is something else. Going for therapy has not traditionally been the go-to
no,
answer in Black families. Is like, you better go sit down and get over it. And anybody got time for all
exactly.
that.
Right.
So how do we change the stigma around getting help?
Yeah, yeah. So I think that it, we need to just have honest conversations. I mean, we really need to get away from this individualistic, um, Eurocentric notion of self, that we are not just here as individuals. We are here as part of a collective of individuals. And it's that sense of collectivism that we need to regenerate.
Mm,
Okay. In my generation, coming up as a, um, a person from the South that was subjected to just outright discrimination. If you went to the movie theater, you could buy your tickets, after all the white kids had bought their tickets, and then you had to go around to the back to go up to the balcony. All that kind of discrimination, okay, caused us to band together, to be supportive of one another. Uh, Black people who migrated from the South to the North, they didn't have a place to stay. They came and they stayed with a relative or a friend. It may have been, a friend of the family, or was an aunt or a cousin, or whomever. So we were always being supportive of one another. But as we move more and more down that path of integration, we start to take on the ideas, the ideals, and the attitudes of middle class white America. And that is, it's all about yourself. It's about all about the individual. And we need to get back to that. Look at the way that we deal with our elders. Okay, it used to be that if you were an older person in the Black community, you were somewhat revered
mhm,
and certainly respected. And you were someone who was viewed as having knowledge and wisdom, that someone in the community who was having a problem, they could always go to Miss Jane, or they could go to Mr. Thomas and get advice. We don't have that anymore. And so I shouldn't say we don't have it anymore. We don't have it in the way that we used to have it.
right.
And so I think that really opening up this dialogue, which you're doing, and I'm so greatly appreciative of the fact that you're doing this, provides an opportunity for us to have some honest dialogue about the experience of being Black in America and how we need to uh, come together as in a more collective sense to address the problems that we experience in our community, and that asking for help is not a bad thing. That's a good thing,
Right.
and we see so many celebrities now coming out and saying, you know, I'm in therapy. Therapy has helped me. We need to hear more of that. We need to hear more of the stories, uh, about your cousin, for instance. People need to hear about that so that they understand that there is hope, and that through helping one another by providing that kind of fabric of resilience and support systems, that, we can get to the other side of this.
Wow. So one of the changes I've seen, you say, people need to realize that it's okay to go for therapy. There was a time when you couldn't go, and they said don't even think about it because you couldn't afford it. And now
Right.
one of the big changes now, and I call it Obamacare. I don't call it the Affordable Care Act. I call it Obamacare. Okay, just like
Absolutely.
black people brought America public education, they also brought us closer to universal health care, so that you can. I can anybody, right? I can just call your office, call another professional, and be covered for
Hmm.
therapy. So I think people need to recognize that because I've noticed a lot more places are popping up that call us, we'll help you. And I said they're getting paid. That's why.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I
That
think
that
it's a good
that's
change.
true. Right. But the fact that they're getting paid isn't necessarily their motivation for wanting to provide help.
No, I'm not
You know.
saying that's the only reason, but I'm saying that suddenly we see it available. When my brother was struggling with heroin addiction, there was no place to send him unless we were
Hmm.
going to spend tens of thousands of dollars on these private places. I think he went to uh, one of those Ananon, some camp. He came back 2 days later with his head shaved and really mad. Um,
Mm.
it didn't work. And as you know, and you taught me this, the therapeutic relationship is very important if things are going to be successful. So my layman's intuition tells me as a black person, I'm going to seek out a black therapist.
Yes. Right. All right. And that is going to be a challenge
Mm.
because, less than, I know for psychologists, less than 6% of American psychologists are African American. And
Wow.
so when you consider that we're spread all over the country, and when you talk about black male psychologists, that number goes even lower. It's very difficult, and so people have to shop around.
Mm.
There are websites now that you can just go and Google, black psychologists or black social workers, and a whole list will pop up, and you can, you know, uh, call and do an initial interview and find out, is this a good match for me? Is this person coming from a place that, that's relatable for me? And so, really shop around and feel empowered to select your therapist, not to be selected by your therapist.
Not just the one that's closest to your house, because the pandemic
Exactly.
brought us this silver lining of virtual medicine. And I think for something like this, something like working on that organ that we try to ignore, the brain and heart,
Hmm.
right? That it might be ideal to be able to do that virtually. That's a great idea, and I'm going to get the information about where to search that from you, and then we'll put it on the on Facebook for everybody to see,
Hmm.
because I'm doing this kind of as a play on words of Independence Day, because as we know, all African Americans don't necessarily think of the Fourth of July as the beginning of freedom. But being not dependent on something external that's really not good for you, except for helping you check out of your real life. So
Hmm.
my cousin is happy. I mean, and it's like, and I always say, is it still fun now that you can't have a glass of wine? And she is the most fun person, and she's found her calling in helping other people. She does counseling, and she's and
Fantastic.
it's really, which I always said she was a great people person anyway, but we were losing so much great talent to people who
Hmm.
have who cannot break their dependencies or don't have anybody to talk to about it. But it gives me hope to know that we can get through those types of things.
Absolutely.
And if you know
Yeah.
somebody, right?
I'm, I'm sorry.
If you know somebody, this is the question I ask, because if you know somebody, you say, you know what, that person probably needs to get some therapy. If you say that to someone, they automatically come back and say, "Oh, you trying to say I'm crazy?" How
Right, exactly.
what is the
Yeah,
best
yeah.
way to approach that?
Yeah. I think that, there are a lot of organizations that utilize uh, people with lived experience. They have been through, you know, um, addiction. They found the pathway to recovery, and they're living, they're being their true selves,
Mhm.
and they're willing to talk about their experience. They're willing to share, so that you don't have to make the same mistakes that they made. Someone once said, it's better to learn from the mistakes of others than to make your own mistakes. Well, there's the opportunity to do that because you have people, who are working within these community organizations, who are in recovery and have been for, many years, 19, 20, 30 years of recovery. And like you said, they're happy. They have found that place for themselves, that's meaningful, and part of their meaning is to give back.
Right.
So it doesn't always have to be a licensed, clinician, to help you. It can be someone like yourself who has already, kind of crossed that bridge, and found that on the other side of that bridge, there can still be happiness and joy, and you can live a normal life.
And have fun. We always say, as you know, you've sat in circle with me. We have been among
Right.
some of like the anointed restorative justice practitioners. You know, Cheryl Graves, or
Right.
Rashad, Vanessa Wesley,
Mhm.
and I always say that a restorative justice circle, may not be therapy, but it is therapeutic. and when I
Absolutely.
And when I look at the depictions of what a meeting looks like, they'll have many movies and what have you, because it is anonymous and they don't let you in there with cameras. It reminds me of an RJ circle. So it's sharing those. Sometimes you share something that was difficult for you to carry, and suddenly it's being carried by you and everybody else in the circle. They're like taking some of that weight from you. So I would,
Mhm.
but just admitting, just talking about it to begin with, I think is the first big stumbling block. So I appreciate you talking to everybody about it. I mean, I know you do this professionally, and it is kind of makes me sad that there are only 6% of licensed psychologists are Black, and we could have a whole nother podcast talking about how expensive it is to get a PhD, and
Yeah.
how much more difficult it may be in the future, thanks to the Supreme Court decision about affirmative action in education. But that's a whole nother podcast. Meanwhile, we're going to reach as many people as possible, and like you said, just talking, even if it's not with a licensed psychology and a psychologist in a formal setting, just being able to discuss our mental health without being moved by the stigma, I think
Absolutely.
all right. Is the first
Yeah.
step towards freedom and independence on this Independence Day Eve. Dr. Rashad Saafir, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for all the work that you do in our communities and have been doing for, I won't say how many years, because then I'm kind of telling people, your age.
That's okay. I
All right.
don't mind. I'm actually proud of my age, but no, thank you so much for having me. Great conversation, and hope to be able to join you again.
You will, because we have a lot more we can be talking about, because we're talking about on this podcast truth, fun, and Blackness. That's it for In Other News today. And anybody who didn't see the interview with my cousin Jan, who was so open and so just inspiring and enlightening about her struggle with alcoholism, which she's winning that struggle, by the way. It's 38 years sober. Uh, we'll,
Fantastic.
we'll put it back up here for you to check out the podcast. All right, everybody, have a great day and happy, and I mean this in the real way, Independence Day.
Thank you.